Welcome to Breaking Woke, how to identify, debunk, and dismantle dangerous ideas. I'm Douglas Kruger, author of the global new book, Political Correctness Does More Harm Than Good. Well, folks, have you been watching The Circus Show? That is a second attempted impeachment trial for ex-President Donald Trump. We're less interested here in Donald Trump himself than we are in what the left is attempting to do, because it's a technique you see them use quite often, and I'd like to discuss that with you in order to show you how it works and how you can confront it, debunk it, and ensure it doesn't work against you. So the Trump second impeachment trial is a classical example of a leftist tactic by a man named Saul Alinsky. The simple reality is you can't impeach a private citizen. Impeachment is designed for the removal of a president from office. But the point from their side is not in any way to run a proper, a just, or even a legally binding trial. Rather, it's twofold. First, it's to ensure he can't run again in 2024. That's the primary goal. And second, and that's what we're interested in, it's about harming the opposition generally by singling out an icon and thereby vilifying the entire institution, in this case, conservative or classical liberal politics, the opposite side of the aisle. The folks doing this are progressive leftists, not classical liberals. Don't let them tell you otherwise. So, the left uses a man named Saul Alinsky's techniques so often that I would like you to know about them. The whole idea behind leftist politics, right from the Communist Manifesto, is constant revolution. If you actually read the Communist Manifesto, it asserts that revolution never ends. The point is that good revolutionaries must always be finding something, some institution, some enduring human thing to tear down. That's the entire point of radical leftist politics. It is constant revolution. And described in the Communist Manifesto is the idea that that never ends. You always find an institution to tear down, an embedded norm to get rid of, and it is constant revolution. Now, of course, if you're older than 8 years of age, you will instantly see the problem with that. You might start saying things like, well, what happens to enduring human wisdom? If we continually tear down human structures, how can there be a civilization? And how do we maintain and transmit anything that we've ever learned that is good? But, of course, it's difficult to see from the other side of the aisle. Maybe that's just me. Now, nevertheless, in the 1970s, a man named Saul Alinsky wrote a book called Rules for Radicals. Rules for Radicals is something like the art of war for progressives, for revolutionaries. And the book does one thing. It teaches radicals how to attack existing standards, institutions, people, and tear them down. That's it. That's the entire point of the book. It is about radical revolution constantly and the how-to of doing it. Saul Alinsky is a proponent of ends justify the means politics. Or in other words, he is evil and finds a way to excuse it. What I mean by that is, ends justify the means politics says, it doesn't matter if you do dishonest things, because you are on the side of the angels. And this is leftist politics in a nutshell, this idea that it doesn't matter what we do, it doesn't matter how we do it, because it's for the greater good, and the ends justify the means. It is always done by smear campaigns. That is the heart and soul of Alinsky and his tactics. So, for example, if you have, let's say, an educational department within a university, and it teaches Western standards of civilization, which have been hard-won over a few millennia, Alinsky's techniques would be used to separate you out from the varsity, to form a vocal mob to shame and vilify you, to pull you down, and to replace you with a Marxist body that then teaches constant revolution against everything else. Now, if you've been paying attention, you've seen that this has been happening. It works well, they do it often, and we rarely ever oppose it. And that is what must change. In fact, really, that is at the heart and soul of why I wrote Political Correctness Does More Harm Than Good. I see this used to devastating effect too often, and our side of the political aisle and the ideological spectrum seems blissfully unaware of it, and it's used against us over and over. It's being used against Donald Trump right now, and that's an excellent excuse to talk about it, because this is precisely what Alinsky teaches. So, what I propose is that we understand these things, teach it to others, point it out to others when it's being done, and when it's being used against them, help people who are the victims of a Saul Alinsky smear campaign and attack to understand what's happening to them. If they understand what's happening, it ceases to work. You can take the effectiveness out of the technique. So, the book itself. As I said, this is a book for radical revolutionaries, and it's been the playbook of the left for decades. In fact, I'd say that the failure of conservatives and classical liberals to read, study, and debunk this one book is perhaps one of our greatest mistakes over the past half century and one of our leading weaknesses. And it's why the circuses, the mock trials, the cancel culture, the deplatforming efforts of the left enjoy such success. It's all Alinsky. Today I'll give you a brief intro into how it works and how to combat it. Now, the point of Rules for Radicals is to force us, any good people, any excellent institutions, the net result of developed civilization, to uphold impossible standards, even as the left does not. So basically, what they do is they stand on the outside and they throw stones against any mistake. They find any error, any failure of a person to uphold their own standards, and they use that to crucify them. But they are not held accountable to any standards themselves. Consider, for example, leftist politicians spent the whole of 2020, the whole year, inciting BLM riots all over America and where they could in other places as well. Now, many of these politicians are on record encouraging and inciting public violence, talking about burning down the system, talking about, in some cases, they even paid bail money for looters and arsonists. Now, if that's not support of violence, then what is? Conservatives didn't even attempt to hold them accountable to any standards. The most basic standards, legal standards. If you pay for the bail money of a person who is an arsonist, what does that say? Now, these politicians are still in power, and they are the ones holding this sham trial against the President of the United States and saying, how dare you incite violence? It's the most incredible thing. So, when a mob gets out of hand at a Trump rally, suddenly their vast machinery on the left springs into gear to hold a globally televised sham trial. They will spend an entire year inciting violence, then when the slightest example happens on the other side, they jump on it. Because our side failed to, which is interesting. Now that's the spirit of Alinsky. It's like the person who argues against, say, Christianity, not by debating its merits, but by saying, look, there's a hypocritical Christian, and highlighting that person's faults. If you get that dynamic, that's Alinsky in a nutshell. It doesn't honestly engage with the merits of an idea. It simply tries to shame a person for not perfectly upholding standards. Interesting thing is, it only works if you allow it to work, and it works beautifully against them if you have the courage to use their own attacks against them. It goes further than that as well. Alinsky techniques will then single out one person from an institution, a stance, or a cause. And this is what the whole thing is designed to do. Instead of trying to attack the entire edifice of civilization, it will find one person and single them out. A Donald Trump, a head of an education department, a head of a church, whatever the case might be. It will single them out, freeze them in time, and use them as the symbolic focal point for an attack. The point of doing that is the theater of the thing. Now consider that in the case of Donald Trump here. This is a sham trial. It's going nowhere. It is doomed to failure. They're doing it anyway. The point is to create fear among everyone else of that kind. In that particular case, half of the United States of America. So, in his book, Alinsky details 13 rules for radicals, the way in which you single out a person, freeze them in time, attack that cause, create fear among supporters, and so forth. In my book, I list them all, I go through each of them one by one, and I show you how they work and how to debunk them. Here are the ones that do the most damage, and the ones that sort of, shall we say, sum up the spirit of the rest. One of the rules: power is not only what you have, but what the enemy thinks you have. Now that's straight from the mouth of Saul Alinsky. That is one of his rules, that is his direct advice to his radical revolutionaries in terms of how you tear down institutions. He says, power is not only what you have, it's what the enemy thinks you have. So this is like a bird in nature puffing up. It's about creating mobs, it's about creating pressure, it's about creating the perception that their side is powerful, valid, or legitimate. So if you wonder about things like these sort of Twitter mobs, or genuine mobs who will come and demonstrate outside a store, an institution, a person's house, it's that. It's a display of power where realistically there isn't any. This is a sham trial. It has no teeth, but they are puffing up and doing a display of power. It's all about the perception of the thing. Now, here's another one of the obvious rules. This happens to be rule number 13. Pick the target, freeze it, personalize it, and polarize it. Let's start with the terms. Targeting means selecting a person who can be used to represent a larger group. So if you suddenly find yourself at the center of a leftist woke mob storm, and you're baffled and you're thinking, why me? That's why. Because rule number 13 says, target someone who can be used as an icon to represent the larger group. It's got nothing to do with you. It has to do with radical revolutionaries who have discovered that you might be useful in attacking what you stand for. And that, in a sense, takes some of the pressure off when you realize this is not as personal as you think it is. It's just evil doing what evil does. You happen to be there. And I actually want you to understand that and take it to heart, because it feels so personal when you are attacked by a woke mob. It's got nothing to do with you. It has got to do with swarming hornets who have been aimed against something that evil says must be pulled down. That's important to know. So, targeting, selecting the person. Freezing means keeping a person frozen in place as the representative of the group to be attacked. Don't let them feel as though they have any support, as though there is any backup, as though they are part of anything legitimate. Freeze them, isolate them. They must be frozen in place as the icon of the group, and to do that, you have to constantly attack them in the media, on social media, with public mobs and so forth, so that that person feels singled out from the herd. There is no support. You are all alone. It is only you who holds this crazy Judeo-Christian or Western belief. It is not true. It is theater. Polarizing then means turning as many people as possible against the target. And that is about manufactured pressure with mobs. It's also about finding anything you can to sling at this person, any mud you can to make them look like a villain. The person standing up for a good ideal is singled out, frozen, and then they must be made to look monstrous by any means. And remember, Saul Alinsky is a proponent of ends justify the means tactics, so they will lie. They will find things that are untrue. They will manufacture crimes in order to make someone look bad. I remember in the very week that one of the southern states in America, I think it was Alabama, was passing law against late-term abortions. Now, I think that's a very good thing to do. I don't believe in murdering babies. At the same time that was happening, there was a manufactured outrage story about an Alabama cafe bleaching food because they hate the poor. And this made it onto the national and even international media. When you went and had a look at this thing, it turned out that what happened was, if you don't bleach this food that had gone bad, poorer people would tend to get hold of this food, eat it, and die as a result of exposure after having eaten rotten food. The way to solve that was to make it inedible in the first place. But that didn't matter. What they focused on in the same week that this became a national news issue was, look how monstrous the people of this state are. They hate the poor. They destroy food. And I remember the memes and the editorials by liberals on this one, saying things like, the one, and I remember the exact wording was, you should go back over your life and figure out where you went wrong and how you became such a monster. No, it's just Alinsky. Here's a group of people trying to do the right thing. And they had to be vilified because the left insists on tearing down these institutions. So, polarizing. Turning as many people against the target as possible. You've got to make them look monstrous. Pick a target, freeze them in place so they can't escape, put pressure on them by throwing as much ridicule as possible at the target, and then wait for them to react. Now, this is quite an important part of Alinsky. If you read his entire book, you'll come across this phrase repeatedly. The action is in the reaction. What that means is that they will form a mob, they will attack you, they will freeze you, they will isolate you, they will lie against you, and then they will wait to see what you do. And the action, the good stuff from their perspective, lies in what you do, how you react. So One of the clever things that Donald Trump is doing in this particular case is not bothering to attend the proceedings. There he is out playing golf with his wife while they're trying to hold their sham trial, and that is precisely the way to do it. Because you don't entertain it as legitimate. You don't give it the power that they want it to have. He has simply ignored it and said, "This is a load of nonsense, you hold your little circus show, who cares, it's not real." And the people on his side of the aisle should not only be doing the same thing, they should actually go on the offensive. And when you get grandstanding politicians talking about what is unacceptable, they should say, "You're correct in principle, it is unacceptable to incite. Here are your words when you incited BLM riots. Let's hold that against you, let's use that to get you removed from Parliament." And they should follow those processes, they should have it legally done. This is where we don't bite back hard enough. Now, another one of the rules, ridicule is man's most potent weapon. How's that for a wonderful exemplar of morality from the radical left? This is the rule that Alinsky teaches. Ridicule is man's most potent weapon. He says, it is almost impossible to counterattack ridicule. Also, it infuriates the opposition who then react to your advantage. There again, you see this whole idea of the action is in the reaction. How you react when they lie about you, single you out for attack, that's what they're after. So how you react matters greatly. If you don't give them the reaction, it doesn't work. If you don't react, or even better, if you maintain your calm and dismiss them with humor, wit of your own, essentially you win. But you can go further than that. Not only ignore their attacks about who you've been, but move on to the next thing as though what they're saying simply doesn't matter. Proactive living of your values is incredibly powerful. Okay, rule number 8. We're doing these out of order. It's simply symbolic of the kind of nature of these things. Keep the pressure on with different tactics and actions and utilize all events of the period for your purpose. So once again, we see that the Alinsky model is all about the pressure, unrelenting, never-ending pressure, and they can use any excuse to keep up that pressure. The action is in your reaction. So if the first thing they try doesn't work, they just switch tactics. They just keep the pressure on. If 3 years of screaming Russian collusion, which was a complete farce, doesn't work, then switch to racism and scream all the louder. You achieve your goal any which way, you just achieve it, you keep pushing, you keep on the pressure. So that's a very quick overview. In the book itself, In Political Correctness Does More Harm Than Good, I go into more detail, but to combat it, several things matter. 1. Understand that the pressure is the point. Don't change your behavior based on it. Don't compromise your values, don't change your institution, don't do anything based on their pressure. And don't spend your time reacting to their pressure, which legitimizes it. Allow it to be a shout storm and ignore it. While they're screaming about one thing, you advance to the next as though the opinion of the mob doesn't matter, because it doesn't. 2. Don't apologize for your values and don't backpedal in trying to justify them. That's what they want. If possible, and in fact this is a good idea, flip the dynamic of the scenario and accuse the mob of lawlessness, of mindless violence, of ignorance of history. You are not the bad guy when a mob attacks you, and don't react as though this is a genuine court case and you must respond to it. They are a mob, a violent mob. They are attacking you. Make that the narrative. Make them the bad guys because they are. Number 3, use Alinsky's rules against them all the time. Here's what conservatives missed. In 2020, the whole year was a year of rioting, looting and arson supported by prominent leftists. Why aren't they in jail? Why aren't they in jail? Because we never hold the left up to any standards whatsoever. The most basic standards are law and order. You are not allowed to set fire to a building. You are not allowed to burn down someone's home or business. You can't do that. You can't overturn cars. You can't beat up people in the street. If we as classical liberals and conservatives can't hold radical leftists up to the most basic standards of law, or refuse to, then we are failing to uphold our own most basic values of civilization, and we are indulging evil. Now that's not acceptable. Perhaps our own new motto should be, the best place for violent mobs and those who support them is prison. Does that sound too harsh? I don't think so. The law already says that. We simply don't apply it. If you don't apply the law, if you don't bite back, if you don't hold them to these standards and just somehow go, well, because it's a woke mob, we must permit it. What happens is, when they regain power, as they did, they go straight for the jugular with sham trials of past presidents. They are not afraid to fight, and they fight dirty. I don't for one second believe Trump's impeachment trial, the second one, will be successful, just like the first one, also a circus show, but it's a wonderful example of Alinsky tactics, and it's the theatre that they're after. That's the point. The grandstanding about wrongs, the vilifying of the other side. It only works on our institutions and our individuals if we allow them to freeze, isolate, and ridicule us. If we flip the dynamic instead and hold them accountable for their crimes, Alinsky falls apart. Start by accusing violent leftist mobs of being violent mobs. Accuse them of trying to pull down the institutions of civilization. Accuse them of being violent revolutionaries. They are. They're not trying to hide it. Stand by those under attack. Learn to see through the manufactured pressure storms, and above all, relentlessly accuse the left of its own crimes. Saul Alinsky is one of the most effective weapons that has ever been used against us. We must learn it, we must flip it, we must not allow others of our kind to become victims of it. I'm Douglas Kruger, author of the global new book, Political Correctness Does More Harm Than Good.